The morning sun filtered through the canopy of the forest, casting dappled light across the trail ahead of us. I remember thinking how perfect the day was, not too hot, with just enough of a breeze to keep the mosquitoes at bay. The forest smelled of pine and earth, that rich scent that only comes after a rain. We had chosen the Evergreen Ridge Trail for our hike, a supposedly moderate 8-mile loop that wound through some of the most beautiful sections of the national forest. The guidebook had promised stunning vistas and a waterfall about halfway through, which is why we'd picked it despite warnings that spring rains sometimes affected trail conditions. I was so excited to be out in nature again after being cooped up all winter, working on my thesis, and barely leaving my apartment except for essentials. My name is Noah, and I've always been the outdoorsy type. Growing up in Colorado meant hiking was practically in my blood. I'd moved to the Pacific Northwest for graduate school 2 years ago, studying environmental science, and had fallen in love with the lush forests of this region. They were so different from the mountain landscapes I grew up with, denser, greener, more mysterious somehow. At 32, I was older than most of my classmates, having worked for several years before returning to school, but it gave me a perspective they sometimes lacked. Walking beside me that morning was Liam. We'd met 4 months earlier at a campus sustainability meeting, where he'd challenged the university administration's recycling policies with such eloquence that I couldn't help but notice him. Liam was an architectural design student with a focus on sustainable building, tall with dark curly hair that he was constantly pushing out of his eyes. He had this infectious laugh that made everyone around him smile, and hands that moved expressively when he talked about things he was passionate about. At 28, he had also worked before returning to school, designing commercial spaces for a firm in Seattle before deciding he wanted to focus on environmentally conscious architecture. Our relationship had developed slowly over coffee study sessions and campus events. We'd gone from acquaintances to friends, and there had been moments, a lingering glance, our hands brushing as we reached for the same book, sitting closer than necessary during movie nights, that suggested we might be heading towards something more. But neither of us had made a definitive move, creating this delicious tension that hummed between us whenever we were together. This hike was the first time we'd planned something just the two of us, away from our usual group of friends, and I'd spent the entire week looking forward to it, wondering if today might be the day our relationship shifted. "Do you think we packed enough water?" I asked as we shouldered our backpacks at the trailhead. The parking lot was surprisingly empty for a Saturday, but the recent rainstorms had probably deterred most casual hikers. Liam patted his pack confidently. 2 liters each plus my water filter if we need it. "We're good unless we decide to move in permanently." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes in that way that always made my stomach flip. I also brought enough trail mix to feed a small army. My mom still thinks I'm going to starve to death if left unsupervised for more than 6 hours. I laughed, adjusting my hat against the sunlight. My mom's the same way. When I visit home, she still tries to feed me every 2 hours like I'm still a growing teenager. We set off down the trail, our boots crunching on the mix of dirt and gravel. The first mile was easy, a gentle slope through a forest of towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks. Sword ferns lined the path, unfurling their bright green fronds in the spring warmth. We fell into an easy rhythm, talking about everything and nothing. Our classes, professors who drove us crazy, plans for the summer, and favorite hiking memories from childhood. My dad used to take us camping every summer. Liam shared as we navigated around a fallen log. He had this ancient tent that always smelled like mothballs no matter how many times we washed it. My sister and I would pretend we were explorers discovering new lands. He paused to help me over a particularly muddy section, his hand warm and steady around mine. "What about you? Were you always into hiking?" I nodded, secretly disappointed when he let go of my hand. My family was big on outdoor adventures. My brother and I would race to the summit of whatever mountain we were climbing. He usually won because he's 3 years older, but occasionally I'd surprise him. I smiled at the memory. There was this one time when I was 14, I was so determined to beat him that I practically ran up the trail. I was waiting at the top for almost 20 minutes before he showed up, and he was so annoyed he didn't talk to me the entire way down. Liam laughed, the sound echoing slightly in the forest around us. I can picture teenage you, all smugness and victory poses. "Oh, absolutely. I was insufferable," I admitted. "I may have done a victory dance. Several, actually." The trail began to steepen as we continued, requiring more focus on our footing. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth more lush with salmonberry bushes and Oregon grape. Occasionally we'd spot wildflowers, trillium and wild ginger, nestled among the greenery. About 2 miles in, the path narrowed considerably, hugging the side of a ridge that offered glimpses of the valley below through breaks in the trees. Wow, Liam breathed, stopping at a particularly good viewpoint. That's incredible. The valley stretched out below us, a tapestry of different shades of green broken by the silver ribbon of a river winding its way through. In the distance, snow-capped mountains rose against the horizon, still majestic even in late spring. I stood beside him, our shoulders almost touching. Worth the climb already, right? He turned to look at me, his expression soft. Definitely worth it. For a moment, I thought he might say something more, but instead, he reached for his water bottle, breaking the moment. We continued on, the trail becoming more challenging with exposed roots and rocky sections that required careful navigation. Liam moved with surprising grace for someone so tall, easily finding secure footing where I sometimes hesitated. "You're good at this," I observed after he'd effortlessly traversed a tricky section of trail. He shrugged, waiting for me to catch up. "Rock climbing hobby. Helps with balance and finding the right places to step." He offered his hand to help me over a particularly large root system, though I'm usually attached to a rope when the ground is more than 2 feet away. This time, his hand lingered in mine for a beat longer than necessary before he released it. The small gesture sent a flutter through my chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of the hike. Around mile 3, we reached a small stream that crossed the trail. Normally, according to the guidebook, there would be stepping stones or a small footbridge, but the recent heavy rains had swollen the stream considerably, washing away whatever crossing had been there. "Well, this is unexpected," I said, consulting the map I'd printed out. The guidebook didn't mention a water crossing this significant. Liam peered at the rushing water. "It's probably not usually this high. Those storms last week must have really affected the watershed." He studied the area, his designer's eye assessing the situation. "I think we can cross here, though. It doesn't look too deep, maybe mid-calf at most." I was less confident, eyeing the current with suspicion. "You sure? It's moving pretty fast." "Here," he said, rolling up his pants legs. "I'll go first and test it. If it seems too strong, we can look for another spot." Before I could protest, he was already stepping carefully into the water, wincing slightly at the cold. "It's not bad," he called back. "The bottom is pretty stable, mostly rocks." I watched him make his way across, his movements deliberate and measured. When he reached the other side, he turned and gave me an encouraging smile. "Your turn. I'll be right here if you need a hand." Taking a deep breath, I rolled up my pants and stepped into the stream. The cold water immediately numbed my feet, but Liam was right. The bottom was relatively stable. I moved slowly, placing each foot carefully on the rocky stream bed. "You're doing great," Liam encouraged. "Just a few more steps." I was almost across when my foot slipped on a mossy rock. For a heart-stopping moment, I felt myself losing balance, but then Liam's hand shot out, gripping my arm firmly and steadying me. "I've got you," he said, his voice close to my ear as he helped me onto the bank. "You okay?" I nodded, my heart still racing from the near fall and from his proximity. "Thanks to you. My hiking boots would have taken forever to dry if I'd gone swimming." He laughed, still holding my arm. "That would have made for an uncomfortable hike." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, we just stood there, closer than we'd ever been before. Then, seeming to realize he was still holding my arm, he let go, clearing his throat. "We should probably keep moving if we want to reach the waterfall before lunch." We continued on, the trail climbing more steeply now as it wound up the ridge. The forest changed subtly, with more pine trees mixing with the firs and hemlocks. The scent of pine grew stronger, resinous and sharp in the warming air. Conversation flowed easily between us as we hiked, pausing occasionally to catch our breath or admire particularly beautiful spots. "So," Liam asked during one such break, "what made you decide to study environmental science? You mentioned you worked before going back to school." I nodded, taking a sip from my water bottle. "I was in corporate marketing for about 5 years after undergrad. Good money, nice apartment, all the trappings of success, you know." I gazed up at the canopy above us, sunlight filtering through in golden shafts. But I was miserable. spending all day in an office, helping companies sell products no one really needed, watching the news about climate change and environmental degradation. It started to feel like I was part of the problem. So you made a change, Liam said. It wasn't a question. I did. Quit my job, sold most of my stuff, moved across the country, and started over. My parents thought I was having a quarter-life crisis. I smiled ruefully. Maybe I was. But it's the best decision I ever made. Now I'm working on research that might actually help protect places like this. I gestured to the forest around us. What about you? Why sustainable architecture? Liam's expression grew thoughtful. I've always loved designing spaces, how they make people feel, how they function. But the more I learned about traditional building practices and their environmental impact, the more I realized I couldn't just keep creating beautiful buildings that were destroying the planet. He picked up a pine cone, turning it over in his hands. There's this quote I love. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. I want to design spaces that honor that idea, buildings that work with nature instead of against it. That's beautiful, I said softly, struck by the passion in his voice. He looked slightly embarrassed. Sorry, I tend to get on my soapbox about this stuff. Don't apologize. It's one of the things I like most about you, how much you care. Our eyes met, and something shifted in the air between us. But before either of us could say anything more, a distant rumble of thunder broke the moment. That doesn't sound promising, I said, glancing up at the sky, which had begun to darken with clouds we hadn't noticed approaching. Liam frowned. The forecast said clear all day. Welcome to the Pacific Northwest, I replied wryly, where forecasts are more like suggestions than predictions. We picked up our pace, hoping to reach the waterfall, which would mark the halfway point of our hike, before any rain started. The trail continued to climb, becoming increasingly rocky and root-strewn. After another mile or so, we rounded a bend and stopped abruptly. Before us, a section of the trail had completely washed away, leaving a gap of about 6 feet where the path should have been. Below was a steep slope of loose soil and rocks that dropped at least 30 feet to a ravine below. Well, I said, staring at the gap, that's not on the map. Liam moved cautiously to the edge, peering down. Definitely recent. Probably from those same storms that swelled the stream. He stepped back, looking concerned. I don't think we can safely cross this, Noah. I pulled out the map, studying it for alternatives. According to this, there should be a junction about a quarter-mile back that connects to another trail. Maybe we can detour around. We backtracked to the junction and took the connecting trail, which seemed to curve around the ridge rather than over it. The sky continued to darken, and the distant rumble of thunder grew more frequent, though no rain had started yet. I think we should consider turning back, Liam suggested after we'd been on the new trail for about 20 minutes. That storm sounds like it's getting closer, and we don't know if this trail will even reconnect with our original route. I hated to admit it, but he was right. The smart thing would be to head back to the trailhead before the weather turned. But disappointment washed over me, not just at missing the waterfall, but at the thought of our day together being cut short. You're probably right, I conceded reluctantly. Safety first and all that. Liam must have noticed my disappointment because he added, Hey, we can always come back another day when the trail's in better shape. This doesn't have to be our only hike together. The promise in those words, that there would be more days like this, more adventures together, lifted my spirits considerably. You're on. Next time we'll check the weather more carefully. We turned around, heading back toward the main trail. That's when the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering lightly on the leaves above us. Perfect timing, Liam said with a laugh, pulling a rain jacket from his pack and shrugging it on. I did the same, grateful I'd packed for northwest hiking conditions despite the sunny forecast. The rain increased steadily as we made our way back, turning the trail muddy and slick in places. We moved more carefully now, sticking close together and occasionally steadying each other on particularly treacherous sections. Despite the deteriorating conditions, I found myself enjoying the challenge and Liam's company even more. There was something intimate about facing the elements together, about the way he'd place a guiding hand on my back when the trail narrowed, or how I'd point out slippery spots for him to avoid. By the time we reached the stream crossing again, the rain was coming down in earnest, and the water level had risen noticeably in just the few hours since we'd crossed it earlier. This doesn't look good, I said, eyeing the rushing water with concern. It's definitely higher and faster than before. Liam studied the stream, his expression serious. You're right. I don't think we should try to cross here anymore. He pulled out his phone. No service, of course. He looked up and down the bank. Let's follow the stream a bit. There might be a narrower spot or some fallen logs we can use. We walked along the bank for about 10 minutes before finding a promising spot, a section where the stream narrowed and several large trees had fallen across it, creating a makeshift bridge about 2 feet above the water. What do you think? Liam asked, testing one of the logs with his foot. Seems pretty solid. I nodded, though my stomach tightened with nervousness. It's our best option. You want to go first or should I? I'll go, he offered. If it holds me, it'll definitely hold you. He stepped carefully onto the log, arms outstretched for balance. The rain made the bark slick, but he moved with the same confidence he'd shown throughout the hike, testing each step before committing his weight. I watched, breath held, until he made it safely across. Your turn. He called over the sound of the rain and rushing water. Take it slow, and don't look down at the water. That can mess with your balance. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the log. It was wider than it had appeared from the bank, giving me a decent surface to walk on, but the rain had made it treacherously slippery. I moved inch by inch, focusing on Liam's encouraging face rather than the churning water below. You're doing great, he called. Just a few more steps. I was almost across when my foot slipped. I felt myself pitching sideways and let out a startled cry, arms windmilling as I fought to regain my balance. In an instant, Liam was there, lunging forward to grab my outstretched hand and pulling me firmly toward him. I stumbled off the log onto solid ground, colliding with his chest as momentum carried me forward. His arms went around me automatically, steadying me, and suddenly we were pressed together, both breathing hard. Rain streamed down our faces, and I could feel the rapid beat of his heart against mine. I've got you, he said softly, echoing his words from earlier. But this time, he didn't let go. I looked up at him, raindrops clinging to his eyelashes, his curls plastered to his forehead, and something inside me shifted. Without thinking, I reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair from his eyes. Thank you, I whispered, for catching me. His eyes darkened, and his gaze dropped to my mouth. Time seemed to suspend as we stood there in the rain, on the edge of something new and terrifying and wonderful. The moment was broken by a crack of thunder directly overhead, making us both jump. Liam reluctantly released me, though he kept one hand on my arm. We should find shelter, he said, his voice rough. This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. We hurried back to the main trail, the rain now coming down in sheets. Visibility had decreased significantly, and the wind had picked up, sending gusts of rain sideways through the trees. We needed to find somewhere to wait out the worst of the storm. Look, Liam pointed through the rain to a dense stand of pine trees set back from the trail. Those might provide some cover. We made our way to the pines, which indeed offered some protection from the downpour. The thick canopy intercepted much of the rain, creating a relatively dry space beneath. The ground was carpeted with pine needles, soft and surprisingly dry compared to the muddy trail. This is as good as it gets without an actual roof, I said, shrugging off my backpack and sitting down on the pine needle cushion. Liam did the same, settling beside me close enough that our shoulders touched. Are you cold? He asked, noticing my slight shiver. I was a little. The rain had chilled the air considerably, and despite my rain jacket, dampness had seeped through in places. A bit, I admitted. Without hesitation, he shifted closer, putting his arm around my shoulders. Body heat, he explained, though his slight smile suggested he had other motivations as well. Best way to stay warm in the wilderness. I leaned into him gratefully, both for the warmth and for the excuse to be close. Very practical of you. I'm all about practical solutions, he said, his smile widening. It's the architect in me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain pattering on the pine branches above us and the occasional rumble of thunder, which was gradually moving away. The forest around us had taken on a dreamlike quality in the rain, mist rising from the ground and wrapping around the tree trunks like ethereal fingers. It's beautiful, isn't it? Liam said softly, even in the rain. Maybe especially in the rain. I nodded, looking out at the misty forest. It feels ancient, like we've stepped back in time to when the world was just trees and rain and silence. And 2 slightly damp hikers, he added with a chuckle. I smiled, turning to look at him. Thank you for today. Even with the washed-out trail and the unexpected storm, I'm glad we came. Me too, he said, his expression growing serious. I've been wanting to spend time with just you for a while now. My heart skipped a beat at his words. You have. He nodded, a slight flush coloring his cheeks that had nothing to do with the hike. I have. I like our group hangouts, but I've been trying to work up the courage to ask you out properly for weeks. This isn't a date, I asked, only half joking. His eyes met mine, uncertainty and hope mingling in their depths. Is that what you want it to be? The question hung between us, heavy with possibility. I took a deep breath, deciding that if he could be brave, so could I? Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what I want it to be. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Good, because I've been thinking about kissing you since that sustainability meeting 4 months ago. 4 months is a long time to wait, I murmured, leaning closer. Too long, he agreed, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. The map that had been sitting on my lap slid to the ground as he leaned in, forgotten as his lips met mine. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when I responded, sliding my hand into his damp curls and pulling him closer, it deepened into something more urgent, more certain. He tasted of rain and the mint gum he'd been chewing earlier, and his hand was warm against my cold cheek. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. Worth the wait, he whispered. I couldn't help but laugh softly. Definitely worth getting caught in a rainstorm for. He smiled, brushing his thumb across my bottom lip. I should have done that weeks ago. Why didn't you? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I wasn't sure if you felt the same way. You're so focused on your research, and I didn't want to complicate things if you weren't interested in more than friendship. I've been interested since you stood up in that meeting and passionately argued that the university's recycling program was a performative band-aid on a gushing wound of unsustainable practices, I admitted. It was quite the first impression. He groaned, covering his face with his hand. I can't believe you remember that exact quote. I was so fired up that day. It was impressive, I assured him, pulling his hand away from his face. Passion is attractive. His eyes darkened at my words, and he leaned in to kiss me again, more confidently this time. I lost myself in the sensation, barely noticing that the rain had begun to ease, the thunder now just a distant rumble. When we separated again, Liam glanced up at the sky visible through the pine branches. I think the worst of the storm has passed. I followed his gaze, noting the lighter quality to the clouds. Seems like it. We should probably head back to the trailhead before it gets too late. Neither of us moved immediately, reluctant to break the magic of the moment. Finally, Liam sighed and reached for my forgotten map, which had gotten slightly damp where it lay on the pine needles. Let me fold this for you, he offered, carefully creasing it along its original lines. As he handed it back to me, our fingers brushed, sending a now familiar spark through me. For the record, he added with a smile, I'm going to consider this our first date, washout and all. First of many, I hope, I replied, tucking the map into my pack. Count on it, he said, leaning in to steal one more kiss before we reluctantly gathered our things and prepared to head back to the trail. The hike back to the trailhead was considerably easier than our outbound journey. The rain had tapered to a gentle drizzle, and the storm had cleared the air, making the forest smell even more intensely of pine and wet earth. We walked close together, hands brushing until Liam finally took mine in his, intertwining our fingers as naturally as if we'd been doing it for years. Conversation flowed easily between us, but now there was a new dimension to it. Plans for future hikes, mentions of favorite restaurants we might visit together, the casual introduction of next time into our vocabulary. The washed-out trail that had initially seemed like a disappointment now felt like a gift, forcing us to this moment that might otherwise have taken weeks more of uncertainty and hesitation. As we neared the trailhead, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light through the still dripping trees. We paused at a particularly beautiful spot where the sunbeams created a natural spotlight on a cluster of wildflowers that had survived the downpour. Perfect timing, Liam said, squeezing my hand. The universe giving us its blessing. I laughed at his whimsy, but couldn't help feeling that there was some truth to it. Does that make us officially forest approved? Absolutely, he said with mock seriousness. The highest endorsement possible. We continued to the parking lot, which was still as empty as when we'd arrived that morning. As we reached my car, I turned to face him, suddenly reluctant for the day to end. So, I said, fidgeting with my keys, would you like to get dinner? We're both already soaked, so any restaurant would be an improvement. His smile was answer enough, but he added, I'd love that. Though maybe we should stop by our apartments to change first. I'm not sure even the most casual place would appreciate quite this level of muddy hiker chic. I laughed, looking down at our mud-spattered pants and boots. Good point. My place is closer to here. You could borrow some dry clothes if you want, and then we can head out. Perfect, he agreed, his eyes warm with more than just the prospect of dry clothes. As we loaded our gear into my car, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently the day had turned out from what I'd expected. We hadn't made it to the waterfall, hadn't completed the hike as planned, had gotten caught in an unexpected storm, and yet it had become one of the most memorable days of my life. Liam caught me looking at him and raised an eyebrow questioningly. What are you thinking about with that smile? I shook my head, still smiling. Just that sometimes the best journeys are the ones that don't go according to plan. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around my waist. In that case, I hope we have many more unexpectedly perfect journeys together. As he leaned down to kiss me again, with the sun breaking through the clouds and the scent of pine still clinging to our clothes, I knew with certainty that this was just the beginning of our story, a story that had started with a washed-out trail, a folded map, and a kiss under the pines. 1 year later, we returned to that same stand of pine trees, this time under clear blue skies. The trail had been repaired, and we successfully made it to the waterfall and completed the full loop. But we made sure to stop at our special spot, where Liam pulled out a small box from his pack and asked me a question that changed both our lives forever. As we kissed under the pines once more, I silently thanked that stormy day for washing out our original plans and leading us to create something far more beautiful than any trail could offer. A journey we would continue together, through sunshine and storms alike, for all the years to come. Total _char_count, 18,834.